White sugar. The story of white sugar begins approximately 8,000 years ago in Southeast Asia, where people chewed the stalks of wild sugarcane, a giant tropical grass, to extract the sweet juice within. Over centuries, traders carried the plant westward across Southeast Asia and eventually into India and China, where cultivators developed superior varieties and more sophisticated processing methods. When soldiers of Alexander the Great encountered sugarcane in India around 350 BCE, they described it as the reed that produces honey without bees. The genuine breakthrough came during India's Gupta dynasty, when techniques were developed for boiling cane juice into solid crystals, early sugar that looked more like rough gravel than anything resembling the clean white product available today. The very word sugar derives from the Sanskrit word shakara, meaning grit. By the Middle Ages, Arab trade routes had carried sugar into Europe, where it was classified as a luxury spice, locked in cabinets, dispensed in tiny quantities by the wealthy, and priced beyond the reach of ordinary people. A single loaf of sugar could cost more than a laborious daily wage. The transformation from luxury to everyday commodity was driven largely by the transatlantic slave trade, as European colonial powers, Britain, France, Portugal, and Spain, built massive plantation systems in the Caribbean and Brazil relying on enslaved African labor to produce sugar on an industrial scale. By the 1700s it had become the world's most valuable traded commodity. The modern sugar cube itself was invented in 1841 when Jacob Christoph Rad, prompted by his wife Juliana's injury while breaking a sugar loaf, developed the now universal pressed block format. Today white sugar is almost pure sucrose, refined until everything else has been removed, producing the clean, neutral sweetness that makes it the default ingredient in baking and cooking worldwide. Brown sugar. Brown sugar is fundamentally white sugar that either retained some of its natural molasses during production or had molasses added back in after refining. The vast majority of commercial brown sugar sold in supermarkets today falls into the latter category, refined white sugar with a controlled quantity of molasses syrup stirred back in to achieve the desired color and flavor. More artisanal or minimally processed versions are partially refined, meaning natural molasses was intentionally left behind rather than removed and reintroduced. The distinction matters primarily to purists, as the end result is broadly similar in both cooking performance and flavor. The history of brown sugar's reputation is itself a story worth knowing. In the early 1900s, companies like the Domino Sugar Company ran deliberate marketing campaigns designed to make traditional brown sugar appear unsafe, publishing magnified images of entirely harmless microbes found in molasses and presenting them as threats to public health. The goal was to position white sugar as the modern, clean, and superior choice. The campaign worked. White sugar consumption rose sharply while traditional brown sugar was pushed to the margins of the market for decades. Texturally, brown sugar behaves very differently from white in the kitchen. The molasses content introduces hygroscopic properties. It attracts and holds atmospheric moisture, which causes the sugar to clump and pack into a measuring cup rather than pour freely. That same moisture retention is why brown sugar produces chewier cookies, denser gingerbread, and baked goods that stay soft longer after baking. The flavor is warmer and more complex than white sugar, carrying genuine notes of caramel and a rich, faintly toasty quality that makes it the preferred choice for cookies, barbecue sauces, glazed meats, and any preparation where depth of sweetness matters. Raw sugar. Raw sugar occupies the middle ground between fully refined white sugar and genuinely unprocessed natural sweeteners, not truly raw in any literal sense, but significantly less processed than the white product most people use daily. It is sold under several names in Western markets. Turbinado, Demerara, and Muscovado are the most recognized, each with distinct characteristics despite sharing the same fundamental production logic. Raw sugar is made by boiling sugarcane juice and spinning it in centrifuges to remove some impurities while intentionally retaining a portion of the natural molasses, which accounts for its light brown color, larger crystals, and more complex flavor compared to white sugar. Historically in the American South, raw sugar was often what smaller plantations produced because the equipment required to refine sugar fully to white was expensive and inaccessible at smaller scales. It was sometimes viewed as an inferior product, though its depth of flavor was actually greater than what complete refining delivered. Turbinado takes its name directly from the turbine centrifuges used to spin off the surface molasses, and it is the most widely available raw sugar in North American markets. Demerara originates from the Demerara region of what is now Guyana, producing particularly large, crunchy crystals that are prized specifically as a finishing sugar for sprinkling over muffins, cookies, and crème brûlée, where they contribute audible crunch rather than dissolving away. Muscovado sits at the opposite extreme, retaining far more molasses than the others and behaving almost like an intensely flavored brown sugar, dark and robustly complex in ways that make it exceptional for baking applications where strong molasses character is desirable. Honey. Honey is the only sweetener in this guide produced not through human refining but through the biological labor of bees, specifically the western honeybee, Apis mellifera, and it is among the oldest foods humans have ever consumed. Cave paintings in Spain dating back roughly 8,000 years depict figures climbing cliffs to reach wild bee colonies, demonstrating that the pursuit of honey predates agriculture itself. Ancient Egyptians used honey as currency, offered it to their gods, and packed it in tombs as a provision for the afterlife. When archaeologists opened the tomb of Tutankhamun, they found sealed jars of honey still considered edible after approximately 3,000 years, a testament to honey's extraordinary preservation properties. It resists spoilage through a combination of very low water content, significant natural acidity, and the continuous production of small amounts of hydrogen peroxide, creating an environment in which microbial growth is effectively impossible. The production process begins with bees collecting nectar from flowers and carrying it back to the hive, where it is repeatedly passed between workers, each transfer introducing enzymes that break down complex sugars. The partially processed nectar is then fanned continuously to evaporate moisture until it thickens into stable syrup and is sealed in honeycomb. The flavor of the finished honey depends entirely on the flowers the bees visited, ranging from light and delicately floral to dark, deeply complex, and almost savory depending on the plant source. Honey's use as medicine spans thousands of years across Ayurvedic practice, traditional Chinese medicine, and ancient Egyptian wound treatment, and certain medical-grade honeys remain in clinical wound care today. Maple syrup. Maple syrup is one of the very few sweeteners genuinely native to North America, produced from the sap of maple trees, primarily the sugar maple, though red and black maple are also tapped, through a process that indigenous peoples of the northeastern continent developed and practiced centuries before European contact. The seasonal window for tapping is narrow and entirely weather-dependent, occurring only during the transition between winter and spring when daily temperature fluctuations between freezing nights and warmer days create pressure changes inside the tree that drive sap flow. The sap itself is watery and contains only about 2 to 3% sugar, meaning that roughly 40 liters must be collected and boiled down to produce a single liter of finished syrup. The boiling process in large, shallow evaporator pans does more than concentrate the sugar. It triggers Maillard reactions and caramelization that actually create the characteristic maple flavor. Raw maple sap does not taste like maple syrup. The flavor is entirely a product of heat. The modern grading system uses a single grade A designation with 4 color categories: golden, amber, dark, and very dark, reflecting both depth of flavor and the time of season during which the sap was harvested, with later season sap producing darker, more intensely flavored syrup. Canada dominates global production at roughly 70 to 80% of worldwide supply, with Quebec responsible for the vast majority of that total. The province maintains a strategic maple syrup reserve, a physical warehouse holding millions of kilograms of syrup as a buffer against harvest failures and market volatility, a system that has no real parallel in any other food commodity. Agave. Agave nectar comes from the agave plant, a succulent native to Mexico and parts of the American Southwest that indigenous groups including the Aztecs and Mayans had used comprehensively for centuries before the sweetener industry discovered it. They used its fibers for rope and clothing, its thorns as needles, and its raw sap, called aguamiel, meaning honey water, as a drink or fermented into pulque, a ceremonial and everyday beverage with deep roots in pre-Columbian culture. Commercial agave syrup is produced by extracting juice from the plant's dense central core, the pinna, and using heat or enzymes to break down its complex carbohydrates into simple sugars. The result is a thin, mild liquid with a subtle floral and caramel character that dissolves effortlessly in cold liquids, a property that drove its popularity in cocktails and health food products during the late 1990s and 2000s wellness boom, when it was widely marketed as a natural alternative to refined sugar. Agave is notably sweeter than white sugar by volume, meaning less is needed to achieve equivalent sweetness, which appealed to people monitoring caloric intake. Its high fructose content, higher than even high fructose corn syrup in many commercial versions, later attracted scientific scrutiny, as excess fructose is metabolized differently from glucose and raises legitimate questions about liver health at high consumption levels. The popular narrative that positioned it as a straightforwardly healthier sugar alternative has since been significantly complicated by that research, though at moderate culinary use levels it remains a functionally useful and genuinely distinctive sweetener. Coconut sugar. Coconut sugar is produced from the sap of the coconut palm flower bud through a process that has been practiced for generations in tropical regions of Southeast Asia, particularly Central Java in Indonesia, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka. Farmers climb the palms, make precise cuts in the flower bud stems, and collect the sap that flows from the wound. That nectar is then boiled in open pans until most of the water evaporates, and the remaining concentrated solids are dried into granules or poured into molds to solidify into blocks. The process is almost entirely traditional, labor-intensive, and conducted at small scale across thousands of individual farm operations rather than in industrial facilities. The finished product is unrefined, golden brown in color, slightly softer and more crumbly than white sugar, and carries a flavor profile that is rich, smoky, and caramel-like, notably not coconut-flavored, a common misconception, with subtle variations depending on the specific wood burned during boiling. Because it is minimally processed and the whole sap is simply reduced rather than chemically refined, coconut sugar retains small but meaningful quantities of minerals including iron, zinc, calcium, and potassium, as well as antioxidants present in the original sap. Its environmental profile is genuinely strong. Tapping only the flower sap does not harm the tree, which continues producing coconuts and sap for over 20 years from a single planting. In Southeast Asian cooking, it is a standard ingredient in both savory applications like sweet soy sauce and dried meat preparations, and traditional desserts like klepen and pilipit where its deep, complex sweetness is considered irreplaceable. Corn syrup. Corn syrup is a product of modern industrial chemistry and a defining element of the American processed food supply, produced not from a plant harvested for sweetness but from corn starch, typically derived from yellow dent corn, broken down into simple sugars through enzymatic or acid processing. The result is a thick, clear, viscous liquid that performs functions in cooking and food manufacturing that conventional sugar cannot replicate. Its most important property is crystallization inhibition in candy, caramel, toffee, pecan pie filling, fudge, and similar confections. The presence of corn syrup introduces different sugar molecule types that physically disrupt the formation of sucrose crystals, preventing the sudden grainy texture that would otherwise ruin the product. It also adds chewiness and body to confections, helps baked goods retain moisture during storage, and keeps icings and glazes smooth and workable over time. Caro syrup, the most recognizable brand in American home kitchens, has been in continuous production since 1902. High fructose corn syrup is a distinct but related product developed in the 1970s through additional enzymatic processing that converts a portion of the glucose into fructose, producing a cheaper, sweeter liquid that behaves functionally like dissolved sugar. HFCS became the dominant sweetener in American soft drinks and packaged foods from the 1980s onward, driven primarily by corn subsidies that made it substantially cheaper than imported cane sugar. It became one of the most contested food ingredients of the late 20th century, though the scientific evidence does not strongly support the claim that it is uniquely harmful compared to equivalent quantities of regular sugar. The more defensible concern is the broader issue of excess added sugar consumption across all forms. Molasses. Molasses is the dark, viscous byproduct left behind after sucrose crystals have been extracted from sugarcane juice during the refining process. When cane is crushed and its juice boiled and spun through centrifuges to pull out the crystallizable sugar, the liquid that remains is molasses, containing residual sugars that resisted crystallization alongside a concentrated payload of minerals, trace compounds, and flavor molecules that refining strips entirely from white sugar. The quality and intensity of molasses varies directly with the number of extraction passes the cane has undergone. First extraction produces light molasses, retaining the most natural sweetness and a relatively mild, almost caramel-like character. Second extraction yields dark molasses, considerably more bitter and complex. The third pass produces blackstrap molasses, the darkest, thickest, and most intensely flavored of the three, carrying a robust bitterness and a depth that verges on medicinal. Historically, molasses was an engine of the Atlantic economy. In colonial America, it was the raw material for rum production, shipped from Caribbean plantations to New England distilleries, converted into rum, and traded back across the Atlantic in the triangular trade network. The British Molasses Act of 1733 and the Sugar Act of 1764, which taxed colonial imports of foreign molasses, were among the specific economic grievances that contributed to revolutionary tensions in the American colonies. In January 1919, Boston experienced one of history's stranger industrial disasters when a storage tank holding 2.3 million gallons of molasses ruptured, sending a wave 15 to 25 feet high through city streets at 35 miles per hour, killing 21 people and injuring 150. In the kitchen, molasses is foundational to Boston baked beans, gingerbread, shoofly pie, and Southern barbecue sauces. Blackstrap molasses is a genuinely meaningful source of iron, calcium, potassium, and magnesium, the one sweetener whose mineral content is substantial enough to matter nutritionally. Date sugar. Date sugar stands apart from virtually every other sweetener in this guide because it is not a syrup, a refined crystal, or a liquid extract. It is simply whole dates that have been dried and ground into a granular powder that resembles brown sugar in appearance. Because nothing is removed during production, the powder retains the complete nutritional profile of the original fruit. Dietary fiber, potassium, magnesium, iron, and B vitamins all remain intact. Dates themselves have been cultivated in the Middle East and North Africa for at least 6,000 years, historically called the bread of the desert because their extraordinary caloric density, nutritional completeness, and natural resistance to spoilage allowed travelers to survive for weeks on dates and water alone. Date syrup and date paste have been fundamental ingredients in Middle Eastern and North African cooking throughout that entire history, and the powdered date sugar sold in Western health food markets builds directly on that tradition in a format designed for modern kitchen use. The flavor is warm and layered, caramel-like, faintly floral, with a subtle nuttiness and hints of vanilla, reflecting the complexity of the fruit from which it comes. Its behavior in the kitchen differs significantly from conventional sugars in ways that matter practically. It does not dissolve in cold or hot liquids, leaving gritty sediment at the bottom of coffee or tea. It does not melt or caramelize under heat, making it unsuitable for hard candy, smooth caramel, or any preparation that depends on sugar's ability to liquefy. Where it excels is as a direct substitute for brown sugar in baked goods, muffins, cookies, and quick breads, where its moisture-absorbing properties and rich flavor profile produce genuinely excellent results. Bakers typically reduce other dry ingredients by approximately 25% when substituting date sugar to account for its significant moisture absorption. Malt syrup. Malt syrup, most commonly produced from barley, is a sweetener with a history intertwined with human brewing culture stretching back at least 5,000 years. The production process is essentially the first stage of beer brewing applied for culinary rather than fermentation purposes. Barley grains are soaked in water until they begin to sprout, activating enzymes within the grain that convert stored starches into maltose and other simple sugars. The sprouted grain is then dried to halt further germination, and the resulting malted barley is processed into a thick, dark, viscous syrup. The flavor is distinctly different from any cane-derived sweetener, grainy, earthy, and toasty, with a complexity that comes from the grain itself and the enzymatic transformation it underwent. The sweetness is noticeably milder than white sugar, making malt syrup a seasoning as much as a sweetener, contributing flavor depth rather than simply adding sweetness. Its most visible modern application is in bagel production, where barley malt syrup is used both in the dough itself and in the boiling water bath that gives traditional bagels their characteristic shiny, chewy exterior crust. The malt contributes to deep browning, a slight fermented quality, and the specific texture that distinguishes a properly made boiled bagel from all other bread products. Malted milk, the basis for classic milkshakes and diner drinks, is made from dried malt extract combined with milk solids, carrying that same distinctive toasty grain quality into a completely different format. Rice malt syrup, produced from fermented cooked rice, offers a gentler and more neutral profile than barley malt, which accounts for its frequent appearance in natural and organic food products as a corn syrup alternative with a cleaner flavor. Jaggery. Jaggery is among the oldest unrefined sweeteners still produced and consumed at significant scale anywhere in the world, made by boiling sugarcane juice or palm sap until the liquid reduces to a thick paste that is poured into molds and allowed to solidify without any further refining or chemical processing. Because nothing is extracted or purified away, Jaggery retains the full spectrum of minerals, trace compounds, and flavor molecules that white sugar production systematically removes. India is the world's largest producer and consumer of jaggery, where it is known as gur and occupies a role in cultural and religious life that goes far beyond simple sweetening. It is offered at festivals, incorporated into traditional Ayurvedic medicine, and considered a symbol of good fortune. Sharing jaggery is a gesture of celebration and auspiciousness in many Indian communities. The flavor is substantially more complex than white or brown sugar. Sugarcane jaggery delivers a deep, almost smoky sweetness with pronounced notes of toffee, caramel, and a subtle earthiness that varies with the specific production method used. Palm jaggery, produced from date palm, coconut palm, or toddy palm sap depending on the region, is even more complex, sometimes carrying fruity or faintly wine-like qualities that make it closer to a condiment than a simple sweetener. The texture ranges from soft and crumbly to rock-hard depending on moisture content and processing specifics, with quality jaggery characterized by firm but yielding consistency and color ranging from golden yellow to deep brown. In Indian cooking it appears in chutneys, lentil dishes, and traditional sweets including chikki, pongal, and payasam. In Bengal, the festival sweet sandesh is traditionally made with date palm jaggery and fresh cheese, a combination that showcases the extraordinary flavor depth that properly produced palm jaggery can deliver.